again. I'm Barry, and welcome back to Rusty Nail and Friends, where children and grown-ups can enjoy a quiet story together. The Rise and Fall of Pilchard. Wingsey Nut wasn't perfect. He was cross-threaded, which is why he'd been rejected by the foreman at the brass and gear foundry. But what on earth has all this got to do with a Pilchard? Well, let's find out. I've mentioned Wingsey Nut several times, and how useful his large ears had been, but it was only by luck, although some folks may call it bad luck, that he came to be living in Morris Wainwright's garden shed. Then perhaps if I tell you the whole sad tale, you can make up your own mind. Eric Pilchard had been looking for something fairly heavy and nice and shiny for several days. He decided to start his own decorating business and wanted a bob to tie onto the end of his plumb line instead of buying a proper one from the ironmongers. So when the foreman said, "This one's cross-threaded, Pilchard," and threw the big brass wing nut into the reject box, he decided that it was just what he was looking for. "Far too many rejects, Pilchard," the foreman went on. "If this continues, I shall be forced to speak to the manager." But that didn't bother Eric Pilchard very much. He'd made up his mind to leave the brass and gear foundry and start decorating people's houses for a living. Eric had already wallpapered his mum's front bedroom and whitewashed his sister's bathroom ceiling, and she said he was a natural. Even his brother-in-law thought he must have been born with an emulsion brush in his hand. As he left work the following Friday, he remembered to pop the big brass wing nut from the reject box into his pocket. "This will be just the thing for a plumb bob," he whispered to his friend Sid, "and save me the expense of buying one," he chuckled. Eric Pilchard started work the following Monday. The butcher's daughter had asked him to decorate her bedroom in pink striped wallpaper, and for the first time Wingsey Nut enjoyed the experience of dangling on the end of a piece of string, as Eric made sure the first strip was absolutely plumb. Wingsey soon made friends with the paste brushes and scrapers that lived inside Eric's tool bag, and looked forward to dangling from lots of different picture rails as Eric's business grew busier and busier. Then one morning, a few weeks later, Wingsey was waiting in the toolbox under the stairs for Eric to finish his cornflakes and have his usual rant to his wife about short-sighted bank managers who apparently believed the most important thing in the world was to only spend what you had, and not to try and run before you can walk. When he heard Eric suddenly shriek with delight as he opened what his wife thought was a very posh-looking envelope. "Just guess what's in this letter," he exclaimed, waving it at his wife. "It's only the mare," he blurted excitedly, before she could answer. "The mare in the post, dear? How extraordinary," she replied. "He wants me to decorate the town hall." "What, all of it, dear? Only it is rather big for one man, don't you think?" "Well, he does say perhaps I could start with painting the front door, and we could take it from there." "The front door, dear? What colour?" she went on. I don't know what colour, snapped Eric impatiently, but it's a great opportunity, don't you think? I must call and see the bank manager and tell him that I will need to buy a longer ladder. All the tools inside the bag became very excited about decorating the town hall, particularly the mayor's parlour, and one paste-brush said that Wingsey would need a much longer piece of string because the ceiling was very high. A few days later, a handcart with a set of brand-new ladders on top appeared in the yard, and painted on the side in large red and gold letters were the words, Eric Pilchard, Bespoke Painter and Decorator. The next morning a parcel arrived, and inside was a selection of new copper-bound brushes and a big brass plumb bob with a very sharp point on one end. It wasn't long before Mrs. Pilchard asked Eric to remove the old tool bag from the cupboard under the stairs and throw the old brushes away. "You know, Eric dear," she went on, smiling, "now your business has grown, you'll need an office. If you fix a candle holder on the wall and varnish the door, this cupboard would be ideal." That's how Wingsey ended up on a dusty old shelf inside Eric Pilchard's coal barn, with only spiders and a few bent screwdrivers for company, and with very little hope of ever seeing the inside of the town hall. Over the next few months Wingsey slowly turned from a shiny brass to a mouldy green colour, spending most of his days chatting to the rusty oil can on the window ledge. No one bothered to clean the windows, and huge spiders occupied all the corners, building untidy webs strewn with dry moth wings and dandelion parachutes. As the weeks passed, Wingsey became aware of one and then two transit vans parked in the yard, with huge emulsion brushes painted on the side, and in luminous red letters, Pilchard Painters and Decorators Limited. Soon an even larger van appeared outside the window, followed by another and another, and every morning the yard throbbed with the sound of revving engines and men in white overalls chatting about last night's football match. The old oil can rusted away in despair, while the spiders spent less time sunbathing and more time up in the rafters away from the choking fumes. It was the vandals that finally stopped the meteoric rise of Eric Pilchard's decorating business by throwing a firecracker into the yard on Guy Fawkes night and setting fire to a can of paint, sending the whole place up in flames. At least that's what Wingsey heard Eric Pilchard telling the inspector from the insurance company the following morning as he walked around the yard, counting the burnt-out vans and ticking little boxes on his clipboard. "If only I'd have been at home," Eric kept whining, which seemed a strange thing to say, because Wingsey distinctly remembered Eric creeping into the barn and prizing the lid off a large tin of turpentine with one of his ears just before the fire started. "Hallo, what's this then?" exclaimed the inspector, flicking Wingsey over with his foot. "We can't afford to miss anything in the way of evidence now, can we, Mr. Pilchard?" "Certainly not," snapped Eric, "but it's just an old wing nut by the looks of it." Then as the inspector turned away, he snatched Wingsey up and hurled him as hard as he could over the fence at the bottom of the yard. The next moment there was a loud crash and the sound of shattering glass. "What's that noise?" gasped the inspector. "Confounded vandals again, I'll be bound," blurted Eric, "breaking some poor devil's windows just for the fun of it." That was the last time Wingsey ever saw Eric Pilchard, except, that is, for his photograph plastered all over the front of the local rag, with the headline, "Meteoric Rise and Fall of a Pilchard." Miss Haylock had used the newspaper to wrap around her carnation cuttings to protect them from the frost, not realizing that Wingsey Nut, who had shattered the glass as he plummeted into the greenhouse, was sleeping contentedly among the cuttings. She couldn't stop thinking about poor Mr. Pilchard, and how he'd screamed hysterically over the fence as they arrested him for trying to defraud the insurance company. "You work and slave to try to better yourself," he'd ranted, "and then some short-sighted bank manager and a few vandals come along and destroy it all. Don't even bother repairing the greenhouse, Miss Haylock," he'd shrieked as they bundled him into the back of a police van. "They'll only come back and smash it again." But being such a kind and forgiving old lady, she soon decided to ask her friend Mrs. Wainwright if her son Morris would be kind enough to call and fit a new pane of glass. She would, of course, see he didn't leave empty-handed. As always, Miss Haylock was true to her word, and made sure that Morris didn't go home without a tray of fine-looking carnation plants. His mother said, "How kind of the poor old soul," and asked Morris to set them in a row along the border in front of the kitchen window. The only reward Morris received was discovering the large brass wing nut at the bottom of the seed tray, which he cleaned with a wire brush and polished until it shone like a fireman's helmet. Then he stood it in the shed window. "You never know," he thought. "Even an old cross-threaded wing nut may just come in handy for something." So, thanks to Morris Wainwright, poor old Wingsey Nut, after suffering the indignity of crashing through a glass pane into Miss Haylock's greenhouse, found a new home with Rusty Nail and lots of other new friends in Morris Wainwright's garden shed. Thank you for spending a little time with us in the garden shed. If you'd like to hear more stories about Rusty Nail and her friends, just click subscribe below, and we'll let you know whenever a new story is ready. Until next time, sleep well and keep smiling.